Working Cows Podcast, episode 347. This episode is brought to you by the South Dakota Grasslands Initiative. This episode is also brought to you by the Wineglass Ranch.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios. And this episode is brought to you by the South Dakota Grasslands Initiative. Where would South Dakota's beloved cattle, pheasants, ducks, and other wildlife be without the grasslands? How would grassland loss affect your neighbors, local community, and the economy? We want to work with you to ensure the heritage of the Great Plains grasslands is everlasting. The South Dakota Grasslands Initiative asks you to join us for the South Dakota Grasslands Summit taking place in Oklahoma, South Dakota, March 18th and 19th. Speakers will address the status of South Dakota's grasslands in relation to ecology, economics, market forces, and social value, sharing both threats and opportunities that exist. Learn how you can be a part of the solution to keep South Dakota grasslands and grassland heritage thriving. For more information, go to www.sdgrassinitiative.org/summit and join us March 18th and 19th, 2024 in Oklahoma, South Dakota for the 2024 South Dakota Grasslands Summit. Very excited to be joined today by Dr. Shawn Baker. Many of you may know who Dr. Baker is, but among other things, he is the author of The Carnivore Diet, and he's very active on social media, and recently on his social media accounts, he's been talking about how do we win the war on food. And so today we're going to talk to him about how do beef producers, how do people who raise beef help win the war on food, and then we're also going to talk about the nuts and bolts of the carnivore diet and some other things along the way. So really looking forward to this conversation. Dr. Baker, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You said the Working Cows Podcast.
Yes, sir. Yep. Yeah, we want to put our cows to work for us. We don't want to be out there working for them necessarily. And then we want to work them in a low stress way so that they're healthier and better animals. And we want to work them from a financial perspective too. This is a business, right? We don't want to do it as a lifestyle and squeak by financially. We want to thrive, and so those are kind of some of the ways I mean working cows when I say it. So, but
yeah, well, hopefully you can make that happen. That's awesome.
Yeah, and what piqued my interest was some of the recent posts that you've been making on social media, specifically X or Twitter or whatever it's called this week, on the war on food. And can you define that term for me? Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean by the war on food?
Well, I mean, I think our food system has slowly gotten worse and worse. I mean, we produce more food, and technology has allowed us to rapidly disseminate a whole bunch of food to people. Unfortunately, the quality of that food has suffered tremendously. I don't know as a consequence of, but it just has. And I think that has been very profitable. That model has been very profitable. And, we've got people, some people call it like fiat food, where you can just basically almost like we can just print money, where we can just print this cheap food, so to speak. And I think people suffer from that, tremendously with regard to chronic disease and poor nutrition or malnutrition. Quite honestly, I mean, there are people that are obese that are malnourished. I mean, that's it doesn't necessarily mean malnourished is some skinny, starving kid in some undeveloped country. We have malnourished right in front of our eyes, and often in the form of obesity. And so I think what I'm seeing clearly is a push to double down on that type of nutrition, and one of the biggest sort of potential market growth places is replacing some amount of meat with, whatever product you want to use, some fake product, whether it's ground up soy or bugs or lab grown stuff. That's where the part of this war is being fought. And I think that is, as we see, there is a really an unending 24-hour a day, 7-day a week message that we as a population need to stop eating meat, cut back on eating meat, restrict it, make it a condiment, whatever. And I think that is basically just driving more of this sort of ultra processed cheap garbage. I call it human pet food, human pet chow, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's where the war is. I think there really is a battle for the future of food. I mean, there's a push to further centralize the food supply so it's more easily controllable. But the cost of that is individual choice and food sovereignty and sovereign ability to take care of your own nutrition when it's all hyper concentrated, which we're seeing, and we've seen that happen over the last probably since World War II, quite honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked to a lot of people about kind of where the food system is now and where it has been, and one of the things that always shocks me is something that I've come to call the eternality of the present, that we think that just because this is the way it is, it's always been that way. And it's just shocking to me how recently it was that the majority of farms' revenue stream was in the form of protein, specifically protein, walked off the farm by its end consumer. They went to the farm, they bought the protein, and they hauled it away themselves. Or, maybe that was the butcher, right? But he was only one step removed, where now we've got all these steps in between the farmer, generally speaking, the farmer and the end consumer. And so it hasn't always been this way. And we've got a lot of inertia to overcome to get back to something closer to that. But it wasn't that long ago. And it's something that we could probably do again, I think.
Yeah. I guess the question that I have, and I'm not a food producer. I'm definitely a food consumer, and I certainly appreciate what you do and others like you do. The question is, people are now used to having a lot of food. They literally don't even have to leave their house anymore. They literally can swipe on an app and they have all this food delivered to their home. And so, can we get to a point where we can provide maybe not that level of convenience, but a decent level where I don't have to drive 50 miles through freezing roads to meet my farmer, and yet still have access to that high quality, protein nutrition? I mean, is that, because we, as opposed to what you might have had in the 1920s, where we're talking more of this, a higher percentage of people were farmers. I mean, there was a point in time in the U.S. where half the population was farmers. And now we're down to something like, 2% or something like that. So that is something that we now have technology, and even as a part-time cattle producer, you can utilize some of that technology. So we have a way to not only return to our roots, so to speak, but also leverage the technology to provide the convenience that so many people are accustomed to.
Yeah, and then and I think that kind of leads to another point of the cost of cheap food, right? Like, first of all, cheap food is, generally speaking, subsidized food that is subsidized by, government programs that makes it artificially cheap. Like, should a bottle of canola oil cost $3 or should it cost $15? And if it costs $15, would the choice between that and a ribeye be a little less of a choice?
Yeah, that like I said, we've gotten used to eating cheap food, and it's the question is, because some people will say, well, part of the fact that we can have cheap animal products, chicken, pork, and to some degree beef, is because we do subsidize all these other commodity crops, whether it's corn, wheat, soybean, and of course, obviously, within the industrial animal agriculture model, a lot of those waste products get shuttled back into the feed system, and so I mean, like I said, if we look at the percentage of income we spent on food 1920s, I think something like maybe as much as 30% of the average person's income was going to food, versus today, where it's, I think, down closer around, I don't know, 6% for some people. I mean, and I eat a very high quality diet. I mean, I basically exclusively meat, and I don't spend that much more money than I used to, quite honestly. And I mean, it's because my other costs are minimal. I mean, it's, and I mean, even if it was more expensive, would you be willing to do that for better health and better family nutrition? Those types of questions are obviously important.
Right. Yeah, and I hope to get to the carnivore diet piece of this towards a little bit later in the conversation, but I'd like to camp out a little bit more on this war on food discussion, and I think that a connected discussion along those lines of subsidies is commodity groups. And I tried to do quite a bit of homework prior to this interview, and one of the things that I did was listening to your most recent appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast, and you talked about the beef checkoff on that episode and some of your experiences with that. Would you be willing to recount some of that, and then maybe we can expand on it a little bit here?
Yeah, and I mean, I've been obviously a huge proponent of beef in particular. And I think it is a incredible, not only just a small part of a healthy diet, but it is a incredibly super powerful, healing, nourishing food. I've seen tens of thousands of people now have used, largely meat-based diets to reverse all sorts of diseases. And I feel that it needs to be studied in a scientific way so I can get past the, I know 5,000 people. As much as I know that's the case, it needs to be formally studied. So I approached the beef checkoff, group. Well, I was actually one of their contractors, U.S. Cattlemen's Association, who I worked with in the past, or I've given talks at some of their meetings. Said, hey, let's see if we can get some studies done. So we did. We put together a proposal. Got a fairly, I think, competent research team to do that, and it was not funded, right? And I went on Rogan and kind of sort of complained a little bit about that, honestly. And honestly, since that appearance, I've had a number of people from the industry reach out to me and say, hey, how do we make this right? Because I think they get it. They see they're starting to see what I see, that this is a very important set of studies that need to be done to sort of unvilify meat, because meat is being unfairly vilified in the media by many people that have a lot to gain financially from the vilification of meat. And so I think this is the optimal and ideal way to do that. You show some people, if somebody goes on a study where they basically eat nothing but meat and the outcome is extremely good, it makes a hard argument to say that beef is now causing these diseases, particularly if it's curing those diseases. One of the things that's constrained by the beef checkoff, and all the checkoffs fall under the USDA, and the USDA wants to promote all of those equally. And so you cannot say eat beef, don't eat chicken, because chicken's not as good as beef. That is verboten. You're not allowed to say that if you get checkoff money. So you have to figure out how do you do research that promotes your product yet doesn't in any way denigrate any other product. And I think that's just the way it is. That's just the way the USDA operates. And I would argue that, perhaps USDA has got some problems, in what they do, because, you look at, say, I'm sure there's a corn checkoff and a soybean checkoff and a rice checkoff and a wheat checkoff, and where do those products all end up? Mostly in these ultra processed foods. I mean, there's not too many people that are eating. I mean, most of the corn consumption in this country is not meat or corn on the cob. It's corn syrup, cornstarch, ethanol, all the processed
Doritos.
Foods that contain that stuff in there, right? Doritos and things like that. So when you start vilifying those foods and say, hey, these ultra processed foods are actually damaging us, what does that do to these commodities? And what's going to hurt them, obviously. So again, you see the USDA actually pumping out studies saying that ultra processed food is okay. It's fine. We can do a diet of 91% processed food, ultra processed food, and still call it quote unquote healthy by our USDA standards. And I think clearly that's just kind of nonsense in my view. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of been my experience. I think, thankfully recently, and we talked off camera, there are a number of cattle groups in South Dakota and perhaps the legislature in South Dakota are going to help fund some of these studies. And I did had a discussion last week, the Cattlemen's Beef Board, which administers the checkoff. And they seem to say, okay, we seem to get it now. And so, I mean, unfortunately, I had to go on Rogan and complain to get the response. But at the end of the day, it seems to be maybe turning out in the way that I think it should go.
Right. Yep. No, and I appreciate that, and I think that is, unfortunately part of the way that the world works. But ultimately, those groups need to serve the people who are members of those groups, right? First and foremost, that if you're serving the USDA rather than serving the groups or the people who are your membership, then you're going to have a revolt. And to be quite honest, they have had something akin to a revolt on their hands in the recent past. So I think that probably that's a contributing factor to them hearing that conversation. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the connection. You've talked to at least as many, maybe more of the influencers, if I can use that word, in regenerative agriculture than I have. Greg Judy, Joel Salatin, Will Harris, Alan Williams. I'm probably forgetting some of the ones that you've talked to.
Gabe Brown. I've talked to most of the people that have been sort of, Alan Savory. I've talked to him.
Right. Yeah.
So I've talked to probably, gosh, I can't even tell you how many regenerative folks I've talked to, but yeah,
right,
definitely. I'm a big believer in that, and I think it's something that it would be very nice, even if we have a hybrid system, even if you're a cow calf. I mean, hell, and you still feed into the feedlots. I mean, you can still regenerate your pasture with those animals. So I mean, I think there's room for compromise. It doesn't have to be a all or nothing. And the thing that the thing that kind of sort of is a little frustrating to me is, you see this sort of all or nothing fratricide type of thing. Well, I'm a regenerative guy, and these other guys are completely evil, and I don't see it that way. I mean, when I look at it from my perspective as a user, as a physician that's healing people, I mean, beef is beef, and I mean, again, there's difference in the nutritional qualities, obviously difference on the impact on the land. I do think we should really support sustainability and biodiversity and what regenerative agriculture brings. And I hope the incentives are produced that, through the Farm Bill or whatever, that show that, hey, we can support these guys, so more guys will be willing to do it. Because a lot of people, my understanding, a lot of people that go from this commercial model to the regenerative model, they don't know if they're going to make it. They may go bankrupt, they may lose the farm, and they don't want to do that. And if there was some level of, safety net that would say, hey, we're going to support you and fund you guys a little bit, that would be in my view, a good thing. And I think talking to guys like Alan Williams, if we could convert 40%, right now it's what, 2%, 3%, 40% to this sort of system, which I think the landscape would support, then we would have a tremendously, you would see the tremendous value that cattle ranching brings, or bison ranching, or any animal. I mean, you can run a lot of animals in this way.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. And so, from all of those conversations, and then also connected to your just your pedigree as a physician, have you been able to pick up on some connection or some important connection between soil health and human health and some of those things?
Well, I mean, we hear about, the soils are becoming depleted. And then, of course, obviously, if you got no soil, you got no food. So there's obviously the long-term picture where we have to do that. And, I've heard this 60 harvests is left, which I think is kind of, we don't know where that really came from, what the number really is. But clearly, we have to take care of our soil at some point. So ultimately, if I can draw a direct correlation from food coming off of a well-managed, pasture that has really rich, life-giving soil, versus one is coming from dead soil, which a lot of the soil we have out there is depleted. I can't honestly say I've seen significant evidence of that yet, but I mean, at the end of the day, if we don't take care of our soil, we ain't got no food, and that's going to be a problem. It may catch up to us in 2 or 3 generations, but eventually we're going to get there. So I think irrespective, if we can say, I can point to a study that says, and there's guys like, Stefan Van Vliet, Fred Provenza, they're working on this stuff. And, I'm a person who's, once that data is out there, and if it shows, hey, there is a significant benefit, then I'm going to be the first guy talking about that. But right now I don't have a study that I can point to, at least in humans, where I can say, patient A ate food that came from regenerative agriculture and they had this level of better health versus patient B that didn't do that. So I have to be honest, with the people I talk to, but like I said, from the soil health side, from the environmental side, from the biodiversity side, totally on board. And I encourage people that have an interest in that to also support that. And I think I talked to Will Harris the other day, and he's got his new book out, and I interviewed him, and I was a little bit disappointed that he was almost a little bit negative on regenerative agriculture. I was saying, Will, what do you think the outlook is? And he goes, honestly, I don't know that it's getting better. And I again, I don't know. I mean, I'm not in that space, at least not directly. So hopefully there's other people that have a more optimistic outlook, and we can, convert more and more ranches that are convertible, because, like you said, it's depends where you live in some ways and how long you can do it, as we were talking before.
Right. Yep.
When there's 6 feet of snow on the ground, you're not grazing pastures, right?
Right. Yep. And there's ways, it does definitely depend. Your implementation of the principles is going to depend wildly on your zip code for sure. So, so maybe the connection there is that, red meat is very important, and we don't know yet how important regeneratively raised red meat is. Like, we can't really differentiate regeneratively raised red meat as far as human health is concerned from regular conventionally raised red meat. Is that
at least what we've been tracking so far,
right? Yep.
And I mean, again, if we know what to look for, perhaps, and it's like, I mean, pesticide residues, herbicide residues, plastics getting into our food system. Does regeneratively raised animals that may not be exposed to any of that, is that going to be an issue? And, maybe it might be more subtle than we think. It's not like, if I eat a hamburger that's, done in a feedlot, I'm going to drop dead of a heart attack, versus if I eat one from one of your pastures, I'm not. We're not seeing that signal, but it could be, given we get people that are willing to fund these studies, because, again, if there's no interest in funding those and there's no money to fund those, it's hard to answer those questions. And like I said, I'm trying my best to get at least the basic studies going. And then once I think we can start talk about, studying things like carnivore diets or animal-based diets, and get that to be more mainstream, then we'll be able to answer a lot more of these questions, I think.
Sure. Can you talk to me about the value of N=1 experimentation? Is that, I think that there's a lot of that out there as far as people who are thinking this way as far as their diet is concerned. Can you talk to me about some of your perspective on that?
Sure. Well, any study you read, the first thing you should do is, who's the study about? Am I part of that group? And the question is, how do we define what group I'm in? Like, there's a really great example that literally just came out 2 days ago. It was looking at the increase in LDL cholesterol, which is classically considered a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and what may drive that. Well, traditionally we hear is, if you eat a lot of saturated fat, it's going to make your LDL cholesterol go up. And there is definitely some associational data in the general population, all comers across the board. People that eat more saturated fat, some of them seem to show an increase, some don't. We don't know why. But there was a very specific study that looked at the so-called people that are on low carbohydrate diets. It was a meta-analysis of 41 studies. All of them were on low carbohydrate diets. And the factor that drove high LDL cholesterol was not saturated fat, or it had a very small effect. The biggest effect was how lean they were. If they were very, very lean, then their cholesterol went up high. And there's something called a lipid energy model, which probably mechanistically explains that. But it's an example of, and the question is that bad or not? And that's the question we don't know. And there's other studies that are looking into that as well. But that shows that, even though I'm part of the general population, there's studies that affect the general health population. What if I eat a weird diet, Or, for the longest time, we used to look at heart disease in the context of research primarily done on men. And then we started putting women in there and say, wait a minute, women have different risks and presentations. And so, like I said, if I do a study on alcoholics in Russia and I get this certain result, and I'm not an alcoholic that lives in Russia, maybe it doesn't apply to me. So I think we have to be willing to accept that, there are differences in different unique situations and various modifiers. And so Like I eat a really weird diet. I'm not eating a 60% carbohydrate grain-based diet. I'm eating a darn meat-based diet. And so my laboratory results are going to look different. Does that mean they pose the same level of risk or health benefit that everybody else does? I don't think they do. And so you have to start looking at other things. You have to start figuring out, one, what is important to you as an individual, because your doctor may say, hey, your labs look great. Get out of here, kid. And you're like, but I still feel like garbage. I mean, it has to be, the N equals one has to be relevant to you, for one. And then you have to figure out, what do you want to feel like? I did years ago. I mean, this is when I first started doing this, 2000, I think it was 2017. I did. Everybody's critical. N equals one. Well, N equals one is not extrapolatable to the whole population, which is true. So then I cobbled together a bunch of people, and we called it N equals many, because now we have more than one. In fact, I think we had 100 people that did a carnivore diet for 90 days back in 2017. And we collected data on everything we had. We didn't have any money, so we just voluntarily had people submit things. We measured things like height and weight and waist circumference and resting heart rate and how frequently they had a bowel movement and things like that. So that, we didn't publish it or anything, but it was, legitimate scientific inquiry. And we found out that the average person lost 13 kilos or something like 28 pounds and 8 centimeters from their waist, and their heart rate went down by about 8 beats per minute and various other things. And so, the N equals one are valuable, and they certainly germane to you, because, I mean, you may do everything the doctor says or what the evidence seems to suggest on the population level, and it just doesn't work for you. Right. And so we see that over and over again. There are a lot of people within the healthcare system that I did everything my doctor told me to do, and I'm miserable. So sometimes you gotta take it upon yourself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a big problem, right? Is that we just outsource all of our decision making to experts. And I think that's true in a lot of areas, be it financial, be it ranching and farming. We outsource all that decision making to experts, and then don't know why we're not seeing the results that we want. Would you agree with that?
No, absolutely. And, like I said, who's the expert in you, though? I mean,
right.
You are the expert in you. So, I mean, like I said, if it comes to some complicated, air conditioning problem at my house, I'm gonna ask somebody else that's got more experience than me, and most of the time you do pretty good with that. But I mean, there's sometimes they make things worse sometimes, and so
right.
we have to realize. I mean, there's nothing wrong with listening to experts, but I mean, I don't know who was it, Reagan, that said this: trust but verify.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, hey, I'll listen to you, but verify that you're getting the result you think you're supposed to be getting. If you don't, find another expert or do your own sort of examination, do your own objective, critical evaluation of what's going on.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Wineglass Ranch. Cattlemen, mark your calendars for Wednesday, April 10th, 2024, your opportunity to get your hands on some low-input foraging experts from the Wineglass Ranch. These cattle come from a genetic base of Angus and Hereford Cross. They are a low frame score, 3 to 4, low milk output, easy keeping. These girls work 365 days a year, and they are ready to go to work for you. So if you're interested in this, you'll have an opportunity to get your hand on some of the 300 head of bred cows that will sell in April at Oglala Livestock. So mark your calendars for the second Wednesday in April, and be on the lookout for more information coming soon. If you're interested, you can get more information by calling 308-882-5555 or emailing info@wineglassranchinc.com. What is it that sets, or maybe it isn't set apart, but from what I understand, red meat is set apart specifically as important and valuable, and even can make up the majority or the entirety of your diet for certain periods of time. What is it about red meat that sets it apart?
Well, I mean, it just is what it is. I mean, this is observation of thousands and thousands of people. And I get people that say, can I do it all with chicken? I say, you can try. And I've not yet to see somebody be successful with that. So, I mean, this is what most people find success is, including red meat, and oftentimes a lot of red meat in the diet is sustainable, particularly if you're in this very low carb or zero carb situation. When I think about the sort of the biological plausibility of that, and I mean, again, this goes into depending on what you believe about how humans got here. But at some point we were hunting, at some point we had, we have high powered, rifles. There was a period of time we didn't have those things, right? Mm-hmm. And at some point we were using spears. At least we believe to. And when you think about how efficient would it be to hunt birds with a spear and how much food could you get, you probably couldn't get very much. You spent a lot of time chasing chickens around with, not that even chickens were even around, maybe, I don't know, maybe, but I mean, it's hard to get food that way. Mm-hmm. What's not hard is you kill a big old animal, you kill a buffalo, you kill an elephant. Like we clearly have eaten a lot of elephants throughout time. So that is probably what we preference to do, because I mean, humans try to, they try to make things easier on themselves. That's one of the hallmarks of being human. That's why I invented tools, right? I mean, it was like when are we going to use a wheel? When are we going to use a lever? It's like, we use the things that make the most sense, and it makes the most sense from a optimal foraging strategy, from a hunting strategy, to kill a big animal. And initially, things like elephants, they don't really run away from humans. I mean, they're not scared of humans because they look at you and they're like, I outweigh you by 50 times or whatever. Yeah. It's like me being scared of a mouse. I mean, some people are scared of mice, but I mean, the mouse is not seriously going to do damage to me. But if the mouse, suddenly pulled out a bow and arrow and shot me, that's a different story, right? So I mean, it's, I think that's where it comes from. But I mean, as far as, what's different between beef and say chicken or something like that, well, I mean, you can look, it's higher in heme iron, it's higher in, other, things that are nutritionally beneficial. So, I mean, and the other thing is, we've gotten, this is partly in the fault of the USDA, is we've been brainwashed, in my view, to be afraid of fat. Lean meat, have you some bottom round, and those ribeyes are once a year type of celebrate, have it on your birthday, but don't eat that fat because it's going to kill you. It's going to clog your arteries. So I think, because red meat, it's easy to do a low fat diet on chicken, particularly if you eat a bunch of chicken breast because there's very little fat in there. It's harder to do that with red meat. I mean, honestly, even leaner cuts of red meat still have a reasonable amount of fat in there. And I would argue because we need it. I mean, fat is, necessary. I mean, it's incredibly, I mean, you get down to around 20% of your calories from fat or below, 20% of your calories from fat or below that, you seriously start running into problems. And, like I said, even I eat a lot of ribeye steaks, and that's, I'm looking at probably 65, maybe 70% of my calories are coming from fat in that situation, and then about half of that or slightly under half of that is saturated fat. So, I mean, I probably 30% of my calories come from saturated fat, which is 3 times the USDA sort of recommendations. I should be dropping dead of a heart attack, man. I've been doing this for 8 years. I mean, literally in 8 years, I've eaten probably, without exaggeration, close to 10,000 steaks, which is a lot of food. I'm a big guy. And not only am I not dropping dead of heart attacks, but I'm literally breaking world records. I just broke an American record 2 weeks ago, in a very, very challenging, cardiovascularly challenging sport. And I'm going to I likely will break a few more of them, knock on wood here, over the next coming month or two.
So I experimented with a keto diet a few years ago for about 60 days or so, just to beat a friend of mine in a weight loss challenge, because he was on the Whole30 diet and I wanted to prove him wrong.
Well, did you prove him wrong?
Yes, I did. I won.
Okay.
So, but anyways, and in the time that I was doing that, the research that I was doing and the reading I was doing, the way that I just want you to correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding of this. And the way that I came to understand it was that your body will burn carbohydrates for energy if it has them available, but you can over time switch yourself over to burning fat for energy. And the reason why saturated fat isn't a problem in that scenario is because it's being burned as energy, where if you're on a primarily carb-based diet, you're burning that for energy, and the body is storing saturated fats in places that aren't good for saturated fats to be stored. Is that anywhere in the ballpark
Well,
of?
I think the way we look at it is, everything we eat pretty much runs through our liver first, right? So, and what does our liver do? Well, it takes, it sort of rearranges things. And so a lot of the fat that ends up in our circulatory system is through a process called de novo lipogenesis. And so that, those fats come from carbon atoms. And where we get the carbon atoms, we get them from fats, proteins, and carbs. And so it really comes down to overconsumption. If we're looking at storing fat, when we overconsume foods, we tend to store fat. Now, what is the nice thing about fat in some case, or particularly meat or ketogenic type diets, is very often they lead to a more profound sense of satiety for many people, depending on how they do it. Meat-based diets are excellent at that. And so we have this relatively new class of drugs, certainly as they've been using for weight loss, GLP-1 receptor agonists, these Ozempics and the other trade names similar to that. And really, the food actually does that too. Those GLP-1s, these incretin hormones, are supposed to work in response to food. And a steak is a great example. When I eat a big old steak, my GLP-1 receptor agonists are being stimulated, right? Through GLP-1 secretion in the L cells and in what's called the ileum, the distal part of our small intestine. And that's normal. That's how it's supposed to happen. And it's what it does is it slows down digestion. So when you eat a big old steak, digestion is intentionally slowed down so you can extract all that nutrition out of there. And then meat is completely digested in your stomach. Not in your stomach, in your intestine, right? And because you hear about this, meat's rotting in your guts for days. That's totally false. There's, the biggest thing I would say, for anybody who's ever gone to the toilet, most of us have done that, and you looked in the toilet, you've never, ever, ever seen a piece of meat sitting there undigested. It just never. You might see some vegetables or, things like that, because meat is well digested by our own digestive system. We don't even need a microbiome to digest meat. We're just literally set up for that. But as far as, so the satiety aspect is really, I think, what's really the major driver here. And, how the fuel is partitioned. We're always burning a blend. We're never like 100% glucose. We're never 100% free fatty acids or ketones or lactate or whatever. It's always some sort of a blend. And you are right. Over a period of time, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, something like that, our body shifts its machinery around, a little more enzymes that are relevant to, our metabolic pathways that are relevant to fat, oxidation or preference, and maybe less for glucose metabolism. And so that does occur. There's it's like we shift, we change the fuel blend a little bit, but it's never, like I said, you're never on zero glucose because you'd be dead. You've always got some. Even somebody, and I've never eaten, not never. I've not eaten any significant carbs for, now 8 years. And I'm wearing a CGM, and right now my blood glucose is at 80. So it's not zero. I'm still have it. I'm still utilizing it. I still have access to it. And when I really get like training real hard, my liver will dump some more into my blood. We have this capacity of our liver to 15x our glucose supply within seconds. That's just how flexible we are. But yeah, I think it's a lot of it's satiety based. And when you deplete your glycogen reserves a little bit by going low carb, it does change the fuel flow, so to speak. And that's why we see, for lean people, more fat being trafficked in the blood, and if it's being trafficked in the blood, it's being used by your muscles and your brain and all the other tissues in the body.
Right. And you mentioned the satiety issue, and you mentioned earlier that people have asked, could I do that on chicken? Can I do the, meat-based diet, carnivore, whatever, on chicken? And you'd say you can try, but it's been difficult. Is that why it's been difficult? Is because there's less satiety there, or is there something else?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, there is a minimal requirement for fat in the human diet, or at the very least energy. And, you've heard the term rabbit starvation, that people that are eating rabbits are very lean animals, and there's just not much fat there. And so, but yeah, it's, there is a requirement for protein in the body. There's a requirement for fat in the body. There's interestingly no requirement for carbohydrate in the body. And so, I think that's why. I think people I occasionally eat chicken. With all honesty, in the last 8 years, I probably had chicken less than 5 times. And it's only because they ran out of real meat. Like I go for around like that. Oh, you guys ran out, so I'll eat a little bit of the chicken, and it's generally been, not very satisfying. Like, I mean, the beef industry used to talk about nothing satisfies like beef, and it's true. It really is, and I think there's a lot of, again, I think it's kind of hardwired into us, and I mean, most of us have gone out and had it's almost viscerally and primitively satisfying to eat a big, juicy, well marbled steak, and it's just like, man, that's good.
So I know the answer to this next question is wrong, is no. The next question is no, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is all red meat created equal?
Is all red meat created equal? You mean like
wild game meat? I mean, rabbit's red meat, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's subtle differences. I mean, even within a cow, I mean, this is an interesting question. I mean, even within a cow, different cuts of meat have different amino acid profiles. Like I was looking the other day, like short ribs have a higher percentage of glycine than do like a sirloin. I mean, it's just, so no, they're not all identical. I mean, they're similar in a way. But I mean, what is pork is red meat, emu is red meat, duck is red meat, moose is red meat. So, I mean, there's going to be differences. There's going to be some differences. And I think, I mean, we tend to focus on ruminant red meat. So as you know, animals with rumen. So this would be your cows, your sheep, some of the game animals would be, maybe preferable as opposed to the monogastrics, pigs, chickens, and things like that. So, I mean, the short answer is, yeah, there's differences. The question is, how significant are those? Could you, if you just only had access to moose meat, would you do fine? I think you probably would. I mean, historically, you look at these First Nations Canadian populations where caribou, reindeer, they don't have domestic cows. I mean, the domestic cattle, I don't know, when the first cows that come to the U.S. were probably 1600s or something like that, I'm guessing. And so, I mean, yeah, I mean, you can probably make it on most herbivores that are ruminants, I think.
Yeah. Right. No, and of all the wild game meat I've had, moose is the most similar to beef for sure. And I was just the genesis of that question is, could you do the carnivore diet on a wild game meat, on deer, because it's lean? Would you need to bring in some fat?
I think most probably you need an additional fat source,
right?
Because I mean, one of the reasons humans used to, access the marrow cavities and go for the brains is because, these animals are lean, and we have some requirement. It's one of the things, because people always talk to me about, why do lions and why do like wolves often first go for the innards? They go for the intestine or the viscera. And my really thought on that is, on a lean animal, that's the only place you're going to find any fat of any significance. You're not going to find it in the hindquarters. You're not going to find it in the legs. You're not going to find it, anybody who's hunted, that's when you cut an antelope open, you see fat around the intestines, maybe around the kidneys a little bit, around the, perinephric fat, pericardial fat. That's what they're trying. I think that's what they're trying to do, trying to get their fat requirements in there. And I've seen, like, it's kind of funny. You see these, these survival shows where guys are, living in the wilds of Alaska, and they kill an animal, and then you see other animals stealing their fat. They go in there and, they separate them. The animals actually steal their fat because I think they know that there is a minimal fat requirement even for animals. I think it's lower than humans, by the way. It's interesting, like when dogs are allowed to self-select a diet, it's much higher in protein and lower in fat than would be ideal for a human, I believe. And I think it's primarily because dogs have smaller brains. I mean, we have a really, our brain is, 2% of our mass, but takes up about 20% of our energy. Our brain is incredibly energy needy. And that's why humans are literally the fattest, like, upright primates in the world. I mean, we are. And it's because we want this reserve. We want this little reserve bit of energy, so our brain doesn't shut off. So it's, so fat is important, for sure.
Right. I'd like to talk to you about the carnivore nuts and bolts, but I want to ask you a somewhat humorous question first, and that is, what population of people in the world do you think likes you the least? The pharmaceutical industry or the vegans?
I think probably because the pharmaceutical industry probably doesn't know who I am yet. I probably haven't. I have not been annoying enough, because the pharmaceutical execs are sitting on top of multi-billion-dollar companies, and to me, I'm like some little fly buzzing around. I think the vegans are particularly galled by me. One, because, I make fun of them sometimes, and it's, not, I mean, I don't really care if someone's vegan, and I have no qualms in saying go do vegan if you want to do vegan. What I have problems with is when, vegans constantly, you're a murderer, you're a rapist, you're an animal abuser, how dare you, all this stuff. And then they put out a lot of sort of information that's either partially untrue or flat out lies. And I'm often, trying to provide different perspective from that. And so, I mean, when I went on Joe Rogan's podcast the first time, back in 2017, I was just sitting there, hey, Joe, I'm just telling people how to eat meat. And then immediately, I mean, I was inundated with vegan attack videos. Like, what? I'm just out here trying to tell people I'm eating meat, and I saw some people get healthy. So all of a sudden, I'm public enemy number one. I'm like likened to Adolf Hitler. And I'm just like, come on, man, this is crazy. So now it's just kind of for almost for fun. It's just like, it's social media, it's for clicks, it's for humor. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to get more people exposed to the message I have, which is stop eating the garbage, the human pet food, and no, meat is not killing you. Meat is a health food. And so that's ultimately what I'm trying to do here. Now, as we, our company Rivero, which we just launched, is going to be an alternative to the kind of big pharma medical model. As we get more and more successful, which undoubtedly we will, we may start to get on their radar, and then and unfortunately they have a lot of influence and power, and we'll see what happens with that. But it's a fight that I think is worth having, and I think it's something that needs to be done, quite honestly.
Yeah. How does big pharma sleep at night? On piles of cash. That's how.
Yeah, sure.
No, I'm just
shredded $100 bills. So, because they don't have anything, nothing else to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, how bad of an idea is it to have the same people who are conducting these studies being funded by these companies? That seems like a pretty serious conflict of interest to me.
Well, I mean, it clearly is. And I mean, it's, unfortunately money talks. And I mean, if we look at for new drug appeals, new drug approvals going through the FDA right now, I mean, something like 65% of the funding for new drug approvals is coming directly from the industry itself, which is, fox guarding the hen house, basically. I mean, it's total corporate capture. I mean, you have the studies that are published in journals. Something like 40% of the income from those journals comes directly from the drug companies themselves, in the form of reprints that they hand out to the physicians when their studies are done. I mean, they pay the researchers to do the studies. If the studies do not turn out in their favor, they never get published. The studies that do get published, the raw data is not shared with the public. Even the peer reviewers don't get to see that. So the pharmaceutical industries can do a study, say this is what the results are, and not even share all their data. And it gets published in the journal because they depend on their money, can't say anything about it. So it makes you skeptical, as to, most drugs, at conception, if they are not believed to be a $1 billion drug, they're not even developed. They're like, if we can't make $1 billion on this drug, don't even bother. So obviously they're beholden to their shareholders. I mean, they are a company, they're a business. By law, they literally have to make money for their shareholders. And if it happens to make somebody better, I guess good. If it happens to make somebody sick, we'll pay our slap on the wrist fine and keep moving on. And that's happened over and over again. I mean, you see these multi-billion-dollar fines being paid out. I mean, that sounds like a lot of money, but it's a drop in a bucket for these guys. When you made $100 billion on a drug and they make you pay a $2 billion fine, it's like, okay, hurt me more,
Right. No
one goes to jail, and 100, like Vioxx, 100,000 people dead. Oh, well. What did that cost? $4 billion. I don't know. What's the price of human life?
Yeah, priceless. My opportunity cost, when I start to look at something and is this something I want to do, like the 5-figure opportunity cost or the 4-figure opportunity cost starts to think, maybe I should think harder about that. But theirs is more like 7 figures or 10 figures or whatever. It's just a totally different world.
Yeah, 10 figures minimum.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the carnivore diet. And I think where I'd like to start is, in your mind, who is it for?
Well, I think it's for anybody that's unhappy with their health, quite honestly. I mean, if you're happy where you are health wise and you're objectively doing good, hey, just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, it it isn't, I've never been like every human on the planet needs to do this or this is the only way to get healthy, because it's not. But I think it is a tool. I consider it a therapeutic tool. I think it is, for most people, it's going to be a time limited thing. Maybe you'll do it for 3 months, 6 months, a year, or something like that. And then you will transition into something hopefully still healthy. But I mean, in particular, people who suffer with food addiction, which I think there's a lot more people that are out there than we realize. I mean, studies actually indicate about 14% of the population has some degree of food addiction. And it's, often to these ultra processed foods. Maybe they're sugary foods, maybe they're, salty foods or whatever, but it does occur. And in those patients, just like you would not treat an alcoholic with, hey, just go out and drink on the weekends. I mean, that's not going to work, right? Or a heroin addict, hey, just shoot up once a week and you're good. So I think those people that need really, really high level elimination, abstinence type situation, that works pretty well. It looks quite amazingly well. In fact, it's interesting. A lot of people that do a carnivore diet that also have the comorbidity of things like alcoholism or smoking, or often find they are able to give those things up too at the same time, because I think some of the same brain issues are going on with how we respond to food. People with autoimmune diseases, I mean, I think autoimmune diseases, I mean, there's more and more evidence showing that actually does start in the gut. And what affects the gut the most is our diet. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. It should be obvious to most people, even though there are physicians out there that, like, it amazes me. They're gastroenterologists that will tell me that inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis have nothing to do with diet. And I'm like, I literally see people every day literally reversing those diseases by changing their diet. And you're telling me it has nothing to do with it, which is kind of insane. So gut issues in specific, but autoimmune disease, whether it's psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, myasthenia gravis. I just seen some people with that the other day, multiple sclerosis. Those are all things that I think can benefit from this diet. Certainly obesity, it's like you mentioned with like the ketogenic diet's another low carb diet that often is successful for a certain segment of the population. Diabetes is a good one. We see really good, resolution of diabetes, normalization of blood glucose, being able to come off all meds. In fact, the 2021 Harvard study that was done on the carnivore diet showed like 92% of the type 2 diabetics coming off insulin completely, which is, I mean, it's really unheard of. I mean, there's no other intervention that has that much power. Now, again, full transparency, it was a subjectively reported study, and so there's self-selection bias, and so it's not the same as an intervention trial, but nonetheless, it's been very good with diabetes. And so I think that's, I think chronic pain, a lot of people that have pain and arthritis do really well with this. So there's a wide range of things that it does seem to. Mental health is another one. I mean, people with depression, I mean, gosh, they do better when they feed themselves better. So I think, I mean, if I guess the easier thing would say who doesn't need to do it or shouldn't try it. If you're healthy and happy where you are, I don't see a reason to do it. I wouldn't. I mean, there's no reason. I wouldn't have changed unless I wanted to change something about my health. That's the only reason I did it. And, or, diet in general. But yeah, I mean, I think that safely covers most people.
Yeah. But I mean, like, as far as who it's not for, you as like high cholesterol people that have some of those risk factors, you wouldn't say that's the reason not to do this. Get that in check first before you go on this.
There's additional considerations for certain people, like somebody who doesn't have a gallbladder. You're going to have to modify things. If somebody has, if somebody is having active heart disease, and like chest pain and, that type of stuff, then I would be very cautious with it. It's not you couldn't do it, but you might have some other consider. You might have to be on a lipid lowering drug for a period of time, until your metabolic health improves to the point where that risk has become minimized. And there's ways you can modify the diet so it doesn't raise your cholesterol as high potentially. So yeah, I mean, there are people that, I mean, there's additional sort of caveats that go with this, but it doesn't necessarily preclude anything. But just because you have high cholesterol doesn't mean you can't do this diet. Just because you had gout doesn't mean you can't do this diet. I mean, in fact, I've seen a lot of people resolve their gout by doing this. So yeah, I mean, there's obviously some caveats here.
Which is kind of funny because generally speaking, people would say gout is caused by a high red meat diet. in a lot of cases, right?
Well, I mean, that's,
Conventional
it
wisdom.
was initially considered. Yeah, I mean, conventionally it was considered this the rich man's diet, because when gout first appeared, 300 years ago or whenever it was only noted in the upper class, the people that were basically gorging themselves on meat, but also they had access to sugar and all this other stuff. And so really fructose and alcohol are probably bigger drivers of uric acid metabolism. But I mean, it is true. I mean, when you eat more purines, and purines are part of the DNA background, so you eat more food with more cells or more DNA, and meat just has more than plants. Not that plants have none, but they do. You tend to maybe elevate your uric acid, and if you are metabolically unhealthy at the same time, and this is the part that most people don't seem to realize, that gout is a metabolic disorder, and just because you eat a lot of meat doesn't mean that's going to be a problem for it. Now, if you have a metabolic disorder at the same time, then yes, it can sometimes exacerbate it, but at the same time, it's resolving that metabolic disease. And so, what I'll sometimes see is people with gout, they may flare up initially when they go on the diet, but within a couple of weeks to a few months, it's gone. And so I just tell them, hey, take your meds, get through it like you normally would. And then as you lose weight, get leaner, improve your blood glucose, your blood pressure, your metabolic health, usually that gout will go away and stay away. And then you can eat. Because if just eating meat caused gout, I should be, I should be able to walk, right?
Right.
Because I eat plenty of it.
Yeah. And another guy that you and I have both interviewed, and finally, I caught up to you in the number of times I've interviewed him this week. I interviewed Glenn Elzinga again, and I really appreciate the way that he talks about the food that we buy. He said it's our wellness investment. Rather than talking about a food budget, he said the food that we buy is our wellness investment. And I thought, from a guy who's selling, fairly expensive meat, right? That's a good way to market it. This is a wellness investment rather than.
I mean, unfortunately, I mean, the food industry has trained us snacks. It's and you think about what goes into the buying decision of most of the populace. It's two things. What does it taste like? What does it cost? I mean, that's probably 90% of the way most people make their buying decisions. And, the food industry has trained us. I mean, here's the sales and never ending, commercials with enticing food products. And, I mean, it's peer pressure, right? Try the latest thing. Have you tried this? I mean, when you've convinced people to literally eat blue food, I mean, there's blue. What the hell is that? It's like a blue colored Captain Crunch flavored artificial maple syrup, and people actually eat that. It's like, it just doesn't make sense anymore. So yeah, I mean, you have to market it as maybe not as food. You have to say, hey, look, this is part of your health routine. This is part of your longevity, your quality of life. This is what you're buying. You're not just buying something you shove down your gullet. That's this other garbage, and like I said, when I walk to the grocery store, I don't even consider most of it food anymore. I'm just like, that's for the zombies. The zombies can eat that stuff. I'm not eating it.
Yeah. And you've used the term a couple of times here, and I hear it thrown around a lot, and I'd like to get a good definition of it. Can you define the term metabolically healthy?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think really, I mean, the definition of metabolic syndrome, which is metabolic dishealth, I guess, or being unhealthy, is a collection of traditionally 5 different markers. It has to do with, body mass index and waist size, triglyceride level, HDL level, and then glycemic control. And so that's what typically goes into health. I mean, you might add underlying inflammation is part of that as well. And I think that makes up the majority of what we would consider metabolic, markers of disease. I mean, you could argue for a few other things, but that's the basis. And I think we have sort of ignored that for 30 or 40 years since, it was first described as Syndrome X by Gerald Reaven back in the 1980s, I believe. And I think if we addressed that as physicians, we would have a lot more healthy people if that was our metric, rather than hyper focusing on what your LDL cholesterol is. Because, I mean, I can remember sometime when I was in the hospital and they were pushing some, vital sign campaign, and it was like, know your numbers, and it was like, heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and what's your cholesterol. I mean, that was, and not what's your HDL or your triglycerides or your glycemic numbers. So those are kind of we'll get to those later. Or, the really interesting thing is, if you come to the typical doctor's office and you're pre-diabetic, hemoglobin A1C 5.9, it's not diabetic yet, pre-diabetic. Most doctors will say, we'll just watch it. Just watch it, see what happens. That should be a 3-alarm fire, going off saying, whoa, 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 there's it's like, there's some bad news going on. And, it predicts dementia. My gosh. I mean, all these things that are predicting, if you roll into your 40s and you're pre-diabetic, your risk for dementia has gone up significantly. And so it's like, hey, let's get after this and turn it around.
Back to the kind of nuts and bolts of the carnivore diet. Is there a range of things that in your mind can fairly be described as the carnivore diet?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a book on it called The Carnivore Diet, and I described it quite well. I mean, it's animal products, obviously. Anything that's animal product, anything had a face, had a mom, you can eat, right? I mean, to that you can add dairy products for some people. Some people some tolerate, some don't. So you have to be a little bit cautious with that. And I mean, other than, maybe a few spices and coffee and tea, I mean, that's pretty much the diet. So, I mean, there's no fruits, there's no vegetables, there's no wheat, there's no rice, there's no grain, there's no sweet potatoes. There's no, obviously, processed junk garbage. So that's really it. It's very limited in its scope. I mean, although there are literally gazillions of ways you can prepare meat and different cuts of meat, and you can get really creative. And I've seen eggs. I should have mentioned eggs too. I mean, I've seen people, they'll combine eggs and cheese and they'll stick it in they'll blend it up, stick it in a waffle maker and make a little waffle out of it. It actually tastes pretty damn close to a regular waffle. I mean, it really does. I've done that. I don't do that much because I'm pretty lazy. I'm just give me a steak. I'm at the point where I don't really worry about that stuff. But, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands of recipes that are quote unquote carnivore now. So, I mean, you can make it, pretty much a decent amount of variety in there if you want to. I'm, like I said, at this point, I don't care. But I mean, and I tell people that are transitioning, hey, you got to enjoy what you're eating, man. If I told you to sit down every day and eat a bowl of plain ground beef every day, I wouldn't do that. I would never do that. So, it might be bacon and eggs for breakfast, or bacon, egg and cheese omelet, and a piece of fish for lunch, and some, hamburger patties with a slice of cheese on there for dinner, and a ribeye steak the next day. And, you can find variety in there. And I encourage people to do that, particularly when they're transitioning. And then they may find that, hey, maybe that cheese is just not doing me what I want it to do. And I say, you use a little bit of spice and seasonings in there if you're used to that. And then you can find out, well, hey, maybe that cayenne pepper is not really my friend. And you figure these things out over time. And many people, and what will happen, and we talk about kind of kidding about chicken, but most people start out, they'll eat chicken. And then 3 months in, they're like, man, I don't want chicken. It does literally nothing for me. So it's funny how people just naturally evolve towards particularly beef. Maybe lamb, you can argue for some people lamb, but beef just seems where everybody kind of ends up regardless. So you can start there if you want, but it's hard because, it's like so restrictive. But if I say, hey, eat, beef, pork, chicken, fish, shellfish, have some dairy, have some cheese, have some yogurt, I think people can make that work a little bit. And then some people will still include a little bit of carbohydrate in there. It's not technically a carnivore diet in a way, but if it works, it works. I'm not here to tell you that. It's not like the carnivore police are going to come bust down your door if you eat a handful of blueberries once a week. It's like, who cares? I mean, as long as you are being served by the diet, then that's how I would say implement it. And then, be objective about it. And if those blueberries mess you up, then hey, don't eat them. But if they're fine, press on.
Right. And then in January, to combat veganuary, right, you go strict carnivore, which is beef, salt, and water. Am I right?
For me personally, yeah. I mean, it was kind of funny because when I started this, back, I guess this is my 8th year now, I noticed that veganuary was in January, and I'm born in January. I was like, I don't want my birthday month to be some stupid vegan month. So I said, well, we're going to call it World Carnivore Month. And I started that 7 years ago. And it has grown and grown. You guys like Joe Rogan and many other people participate now. And so it's really become kind of a worldwide phenomenon. And because I am pretty much all year round carnivore, I mean, I just do it anyway. I just tighten things up for me personally. I just go back to beef, salt, and water. And that's what I'm doing. That's day 18. I feel like I can run through a wall right now. I feel great. I mean, I literally why don't I do this all year round? Why do I let the other stuff creep back in? But it's just, I'm human, right?
Right.
But I mean, literally, I think beef is a superfood. I mean, it really is. Once you adapt to it. Now, there's obviously adaptation things that occur, and some people don't feel good when you first do it. But man, if you're adapted to it, it's like whatever. What didn't no, it's not. It's the opposite of kryptonite for Superman. It's like that super fuel. I just feel great. So that's what I do.
Yep. And then is there a process that you recommend people go through as far as getting onto the diet and getting there?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you're starting. If you're particularly sick and you're on a lot of medications, you're on blood pressure meds and diabetes meds and, antidepressants and things like that, it probably makes sense to have some supervision. It really does, because you're going to probably need to take those meds off, and you don't want to do it in an unsupervised fashion because you could hurt yourself with that. So I think that's one caveat. And that's part of that company, Rivero, that we have. We have physicians that oversee all this stuff. But I mean, if you are coming from a full-on standard American high-carb diet and you want to go day one cold turkey, you may, if you're a little bit older, you might have some, or really any age, you might run into some pretty severe sort of withdrawal type symptoms, transition symptoms. So in those cases, it might make sense to spend, a couple of weeks, maybe a month, tapering down. Like the way I started, because I ran into this group of people 10 years ago or 9 years ago doing this crazy all meat diet. They weren't calling it the carnivore diet. They called it the zero carb diet. I thought they were nuts, man. I was like, what? You guys are nuts. All you eating is meat? That's crazy. But I eventually said, I followed them kind of and vicariously watched them get better and better and ask questions and looked at the resources they had to support that. And I said, kind of makes sense to me. And I was willing to try it because I was already low carb at the time, and I was already kind of not really scared of fat or any of that stuff. And so what I did was I just had one meal. I had steak and eggs for breakfast one morning. And I don't think I can't remember if I'd ever done that in my life. I had no toast, no juice, no piece of fruit, just steak and eggs. And I was like, that was okay. It was good. So I did that for a couple of days. I just had steak and eggs for breakfast. Then I went to 2 meals, and then I went to 3 meals. And then all of a sudden it was like, I'm going to do this for 3 days in a row. And I just kind of slowly ramped it up over a period of probably 6 months until sort of the end of 2016. And then I said, I'm going to do it for 30 days. And I announced it on my social media account. And it was much smaller than it is now, but it was still several thousand people. And I remember conducting a poll. I said, I'm doing all meat for a month. I'm surely going to die. What am I going to die? Have scurvy, have a heart attack. My colon's going to fall out. Of course, none of that happened. The end result was I was like, in the 30 days, I was like, man, I feel pretty good. And then I went back to my regular omnivorous healthy diet, and I immediately felt worse. Within 24 hours, I said, you know what? I'd rather feel good. So I went back to the all meat thing. My wife looked at me. She said, how long are you going to do this for? And I said, I don't know. Let me see if I can get to a year. And I did it for a year, and then I just kept going, and I've been going ever since. And now finally she is doing it after seeing me do this for 7.5 years. She's finally committed to go 100% because she was initially vegetarian when we first met, but she had all kinds of stomach issues, and she was starting to add fish back in. And it's been it took me 5 years to get her to eat red meat. She finally had a hamburger, and now she eats steak every day. And her diet is pretty much steak or hamburger and a little bit of cheese because she's from France, and maybe a cut up a piece of an apple or something like that. That's her diet normally. And this month she's given up that apple. So progress on her front. It's kind of funny.
And is there a range of what you think is can be included in a quote unquote healthy diet? I mean, is it really just if it's ultra processed, we really need to get it out, and then as far as some raw fruits and vegetables, some of that's okay,
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously, the less processed in general, the better. Some people will ground beef is processed. I mean, technically is. Some people will protein powders, ultra processed, technically are. But I think for most of these ultra processed foods, and these are 5 or more ingredients containing things you can't pronounce or that aren't on your kitchen shelf, mono and diglycerides and polysorbate 80 and whatever. Those are ultra processed foods. If you get rid of those, I don't think you're going to do yourself any harm. You're likely to improve your quality of life. I think focusing on a meat-based diet, high quality protein is essential. I mean, it's essential for maintaining and promoting quality lean mass, which I think is incredibly important, not only for mitigation of disease and function, but also for longevity. So I think those things are important. And then to what you add to that. So I look at it as like, if you make meat the meal, like if you think about my food is a steak or whatever, or a pork chop or something like that. And then you say the rest of it's a condiment. I'll have a few mushrooms on there, or maybe I'll have a handful of blueberries afterward or something like that, and just treat it like that. I think you're gonna do a long way to improve your health. And like I said, there's a small percentage of people that will probably want to just dial that back to pure meat and play with that for a while. But if we were to get out, it's like our pets, the same thing. I mean, we got so many dang fat, overweight pets that smell bad. They're always farting, or can't see, their eyes are all glassed over, their skin's bad. You put those dogs on an all meat diet and they lean out, they start running and playing again. Their breath smells better. They don't fart as much. They don't poop as much. The same thing happens with humans. When you get rid of that ultra processed human pet food, that human pet chow that we're all eating is killing us. And it tastes good. That's the problem. It tastes so darn good. You go to the store and you look at it. I mean, I can walk down the aisle and I'll glance at stuff. I'll say, it probably tastes pretty good, but I just don't consider it food anymore.
Right. I think that in my experience, one of the problems with like green leafy vegetables is everything you have to put on them to make them edible. Right. There's so much, seems like to me that there's so many tannins in them and everything that you have to put something on them to eat them. And then they might actually taste good to a cow, but put that in front of a 1-year-old baby. He ain't eating that. He's going to throw it off the table and scream. You got to trick the kid to eat it. Yeah.
I mean, there's there for a reason. I mean, I honestly believe, what is the nutritional value of eating leaves for a human being? You get almost no energy out of it. It tastes bad. You can't even digest it. I mean, the minimal amount of polyphenols or whatever you think you're absorbing from that. I mean, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but meat has polyphenols in it. I mean, these animals, Glenn Elzinga is a perfect example of that. When you test his meat in a lab, he's probably got 70,000 unique nutritional compounds in there. Many of them are plant many of them are quote unquote phytonutrients. And we don't talk about it in beef because we just don't even, maybe don't people even realize it's in there. So I think that, leaves are, I ate a lot of salads when I was on a ketogenic diet. I remember I'd buy a 1 pound bag of spinach and I'd eat the whole thing at once, but I put bacon and eggs and, dressing and nuts and cranberries and all this stuff so it was edible. But if I just had to sit down and eat a plain bag of lettuce or spinach, no way, man. I'd be like, no, I couldn't get through this. This is awful.
Yeah.
So you have to disguise it. If you have to disguise something to eat it, then it's a problem. That's the same thing with meat. If you got to slather your meat in a bunch of barbecue sauce, you don't know how to cook it right.
Yep.
You got bad meat, one of the two. Meat should taste pretty good with minimal effort. I mean, a little bit of heat, maybe a little salt, and a good steak or a good piece of meat, even ground beef, doesn't need anything.
Yep. No, totally agree. Well, I want to be respectful of your time today, so I'll just point towards wrapping up by asking a couple of last questions. And the first one is there a pinch point in the red meat supply that my audience can help solve, or that they can maybe even that it presents a business opportunity for them? You mentioned that you went to buy some meat. They were out of meat, real meat, so you bought chicken. Is there a pinch point that you're aware of that we can help with?
Well, I'm concerned for the future of the centralization of the market. So I hope more ranchers get into the direct to consumer. I know it's work. I mean, it's a different skill set. Yep. I mean, you got to put online marketing campaign, but I do think there's a growing demand for that. And I think, some people are very particular about how I know there's some people worried about mRNA vaccines in their meat. And so I know we don't do that in beef anyway, but there's people that are concerned about that. But I mean, I think it's, here's one thing I would say, and I guess it depends on how you finish the animal, but there's a lot of people in the low carb space that like fat, and we've been trained to trim it all away. And so, if you can raise an animal that, again, when you're doing grain finishing, is easy to do. I mean, they know how to grain. I think they get 85% choice or prime now. You come out of the feedlot. So as a regenerative farmer, pay attention to how you finish those animals, because if you send some real stringy, real low level of marbling, I'm probably not going to want it. I mean, that's just the way it is, because I need my energy. I got to get it from somewhere. So I think and of course that means more time on grass or something. I mean, better than that, how you get a nicely finished animal that's been grass finished or something like that, or regeneratively raised. But I think that's there. I really think that ranchers need to know they have a product that is, not only tastes good, but it's literally nutritional gold. It is something you need to get behind, because when I go to present to cattlemen, I've talked in front of U.S. cattlemen a couple of times with the California Cattlemen's Association, and as I sat there and told these guys, the food you have is one of the healthiest foods on the planet, most of them have never heard that before. They're like, what? I thought it was supposed to be. I mean, even these cattle ranchers are still eating the USDA garbage recommendations because their doctor told them or whatever. And it's something as a producer, you are producing a product that is so incredibly valuable. And if you're thinking about, why am I doing this? Gosh, there's a growing demand of people that really start to understand this. And I mean, there's so much that some of them are becoming cattle ranchers themselves because they're worried about the food supply. They're worried about, this is what's made me healthy. Can I guarantee I'm going to have this for the next 30, 40, 50 years, or that my kids can have it? So I think really, because, again, the beef checkoff, beef, it's what's for dinner, right? They're not allowed to say beef is the superfood that it is because of the fact that they may offend the chicken checkoff or the soybean checkoff. So they're limited in what they're allowed, the language they're allowed to use, but we don't have to be. I'm out here, screaming from the rooftops every day on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. This is nutritional gold, and so I'd be very aggressive in marketing this stuff. I mean, again, depending on, I get it. Not everybody wants to do the direct to consumer, but at the very least, understand what you're providing, because it is so good. And I mean, there's going to be a growing demand for that, at least in this community. And I hope. I talked to the Cattlemen's Beef Board, the other day, and I said, hey, you guys should be shooting to increase the demand by 10%, over the next 10 years. I mean, I think it's doable. And instead of, because it's gone down 30% since 1977. I mean, we used to eat 92 pounds of beef a year per capita. Now we eat 52. I mean, and the cattle herd is obviously at the lowest it's been since like 61 or something like that. So, I mean, maybe be ready to ramp up. I mean, that would be great from my perspective. But again, if you can do it, and particularly if you're doing it in a regenerative way, I mean, more cows on grass, man, is better. The better it is for the environment. And obviously, there's going to be pressure coming. I know this discussion isn't over. I mean, I know they had the COP28 and they had their proclamations, and they're going to focus on methane to a degree, but they're still. But the people that don't want meat to be on the planet, they're not going away, and they're going to keep going. They're not quitting. They're in it for the long haul. So we need to be too. Yeah. And like I said, I hope that more and more, people that are, the average, I think the average age of ranchers in the U.S. is like 63. Mm-hmm. Gosh, I hope that goes down to 43 or something like that. That would be much, much better.
Yep. Last question. Is tell me a little bit more. You've mentioned it a couple of times about Rivero and the project that you've launched and what that's going to look at.
So Rivero is a full service medical company. I mean, we basically have licensed MDs in all 50 states. And our mission is to help people with chronic diseases, whether it's cardiometabolic diseases, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and then autoimmune and inflammatory diseases is our current slate of things we're looking at. So any kind of autoimmune disease or inflammatory disease, we help with. So we get you into a program, we pair you with a physician, we pair you with a health coach team. We have all kinds of software that supports that. And it's, it's a subscription model. So it's, we don't take insurance yet. We hope to one day, once we, get a little bit more, patients in there, so we can approach the payers with that. But right now, I mean, it's a lot of people. If you have an interest in going on even a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet, and you go to the standard physician, they're either clueless about it or they think it's a bad thing for you, and so they try to discourage you and they don't support you in that. They don't know what labs to order, So at least our physicians have all been trained. A lot of them, by me, myself, and others, and we have a lot of physicians. Our physicians are really, really dialed into this stuff. And their mission is not just to give you another pill. I mean, if you just want to go to a place where it's convenient to get your pills refilled, don't go to Rivero. If you're interested in getting healthy, getting off medications, changing who you are as a person and no longer being sick, then that's who we want to serve. But I mean, if your goal is just like, oh, I like my doctor because he never asks a question when I ask for refills. I mean, that's the wrong model. But yeah, Rivero.com. We just literally launched. I mean, we had something like 6,000 people on our waiting list, and we're just now starting to draw them in. So the earlier you get on the waiting list, the quicker the likelihood that you'll be able to be, part of the program and stuff like that. And my goal is really, probably about a year for most people. Get them in there, treat them for a year, get them off all their meds, heal them, get them healthy, get them to a healthy way, healthy lifestyle. And then I hope I never see them again. Quite honestly, I don't want to keep you for a chronic patient for life. I want to get you healed. And I mean, the best thing you can do for your health is stay out of the healthcare system. Honestly, I mean, I think so. It's a pretty, and for emergencies, if I'm in a car wreck and I break my femur, don't feed me a steak. I mean, take me to a damn orthopedic surgeon, you can rod me and fix my leg. But I mean, but for day-to-day chronic disease management and instead of just managing disease, get rid of the disease. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, very good. Well, Dr. Baker, again, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. I'll have links to Rivero and other things we talked about here in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/347. Workingcows.net/347 is the show notes page for today, so you can go there and find some links and catch up with Dr. Baker and everything he's doing. But thanks again for your time.
Clay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Very good stuff there with Dr. Baker. Really appreciate his perspective and the way that he articulates many of these things and the work that he is doing, and just his interest in this food system as a whole and helping people get healthy, not just keep them coming back for more medications and more treatment, but helping them get healthy. So really, really appreciate that conversation. Looking forward to next week on the Working Cows podcast. We will be talking with Glenn Elzinga. Recently had the opportunity to go to and MC the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition's Soil Health Conference, and Glenn was one of the keynote speakers there. And so in preparation for that conference, I sat down with Glenn and we talked a little bit about how he is managing all of the complexity at his place, as well as the things that are really, truly important as we seek to be good stewards of the things that have been entrusted to us. And be on the lookout for a really special episode where I will share with you the live recording of a panel discussion with Glenn Elzinga, Zach Smith, Cooper Hibbard, and Jay Fuhrer. So that's going to be a really special episode coming up in the near future. But for now, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing and sharing, and I really appreciate it. And we will see you again real soon with another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.